Every Battle of Britain documentary celebrates the Spitfire as the fighter that saved England from Nazi invasion. But declassified RAF records reveal a shocking truth. The Hawker Hurricane shot down more German aircraft than the legendary Spitfire, 60% of total Luftwaffe losses during Britain's darkest hour. The rugged, fabric-covered fighter that history forgot actually won the battle while its glamorous stablemate received the glory. This is the story of how an underestimated workhorse became Germany's nightmare and why Luftwaffe pilots learned to fear the Hurricane more than any other RAF fighter. The Battle of Britain's official statistics contradict 7 decades of popular mythology that credits the Spitfire with saving Britain from invasion. Between July and October 1940, RAF Fighter Command shot down 1,733 German aircraft. Hurricane squadrons accounted for 1,593 of those kills, over 60% of total Luftwaffe losses. Spitfire squadrons, despite their legendary reputation and technical superiority in certain performance categories, destroyed only 529 German aircraft during the same period, meaning the Hurricane achieved triple the kill count while operating alongside the fighter that would monopolize historical credit and cultural memory for generations. The numerical advantage stemmed partly from squadron deployment numbers. RAF Fighter Command fielded 32 Hurricane squadrons compared to 19 Spitfire squadrons during the battle's critical phase. But even accounting for numerical superiority, Hurricane squadrons achieved higher kill rates per aircraft than Spitfire units, demonstrating effectiveness that raw deployment numbers alone couldn't explain, and suggesting that Hurricane tactics, ruggedness, or firepower provided advantages that compensated for the Spitfire's superior speed and altitude performance that aviation historians would later emphasize. Production figures further underscore the Hurricane's centrality to RAF operations. By war's end, British factories had produced 14,533 Hurricanes compared to 20,351 Spitfires. During the critical 1940 to 1941 period, when Britain fought alone, Hurricane production significantly exceeded Spitfire output, meaning the aircraft that actually defended Britain in its hour of maximum peril was the sturdy workhorse rather than the elegant thoroughbred. Yet post-war narratives systematically elevated Spitfire mythology while relegating the Hurricane to supporting role status despite statistical evidence proving otherwise. German loss records corroborate RAF claims. Luftwaffe casualty reports from August to September 1940 show bomber losses far exceeded fighter casualties, exactly the pattern Hurricane doctrine was designed to create. The disparity reveals that while Spitfires dueled with Bf-109s for aerial supremacy, Hurricanes were systematically destroying the bombers that were supposed to break British resistance, achieving the strategic objective, preventing invasion, that tactical fighter-versus-fighter engagements couldn't accomplish regardless of individual combat outcomes. But raw numbers don't explain why Germany feared the Hurricane specifically. The Hurricane's seemingly obsolete construction, fabric-covered wings over metal tube framework, proved strategically superior to modern monocoque designs under combat conditions. Battle damage that would ground metal-skinned aircraft for days could be repaired on Hurricane wings in hours using fabric patches and dope. RAF ground crews could literally patch bullet holes with fabric, brush on dope sealant, and return aircraft to combat readiness overnight, creating maintenance advantages that multiplied operational availability, while Spitfire squadrons waited for metal panels, riveting equipment, and specialized repair skills that Hurricane maintenance bypassed entirely through straightforward fabric work any competent mechanic could perform. The robust structure absorbed punishment that would destroy more advanced designs. Cannon shells and machine gun rounds frequently passed through fabric without triggering explosive filler, creating holes rather than catastrophic structural failures. The metal tube internal structure provided strength, while fabric covering provided damage resistance through its very primitiveness, and pilots reported returning from combat with wings resembling Swiss cheese, yet maintaining full structural integrity and control authority that modern stressed skin designs would have lost after sustaining identical battle damage patterns. The construction method also provided unexpected tactical advantages during forced landings and crash scenarios that metal-skinned fighters couldn't survive. The fabric-covered wings absorbed impact energy through controlled tearing and deformation, allowing the underlying tube structure to remain intact during rough landings in fields, on beaches, or even controlled crashes where metal wings would crumple catastrophically. RAF casualty statistics showed Hurricane pilots survived forced landings at significantly higher rates than pilots flying metal construction fighters, creating a hidden survivability advantage that kept experienced pilots alive to fight again, while enemy and allied metal aircraft pilots died in crashes that Hurricane construction allowed them to walk away from relatively unscathed. German pilots discovered that destroying Hurricanes required concentrated fire or lucky hits to critical systems. Reports from Luftwaffe fighter units describe frustration at scoring multiple hits without achieving kills, unlike the Bf-109's vulnerable coolant system, where single hits caused catastrophic engine failure, or the Spitfire's complex stressed skin structure that could fail from battle damage in unexpected ways. The Hurricane's straightforward construction provided no single critical vulnerability, forcing German pilots to either achieve pilot kills, engine destruction, or fuel system hits, rather than relying on structural damage to bring down opponents. The maintenance simplicity extended operational advantages beyond battle damage repair. Hurricane squadrons maintained higher operational readiness rates than Spitfire units throughout the Battle of Britain. While Spitfire squadrons averaged 60% aircraft availability, Hurricane units often achieved 75% plus operational readiness, meaning more aircraft available for each scramble and creating numerical advantages that compounded the Hurricane's existing deployment superiority. And if you think that's impressive, wait until you see how the Hurricane's firepower turned German bombers into statistics. Hit subscribe and trust us, you'll want to see where this goes. RAF Fighter Command developed tactical doctrine that played to each fighter's strengths while exploiting Luftwaffe operational patterns. Spitfire squadrons engaged Bf-109 escorts at altitude, while Hurricane squadrons attacked bomber formations at lower altitudes where Hurricane performance remained competitive. This division of labor wasn't admission of Hurricane inferiority, but recognition that winning the Battle of Britain required destroying bombers, not achieving fighter versus fighter kill ratios. And the Hurricane's 8.303 Browning machine guns, concentrated in the wings, delivered devastating firepower against bombers' unarmored cockpits, engines, and fuel tanks. The concentrated wing armament, 4 guns per wing firing converging streams, created destructive patterns that shredded bomber structures. Pilots aimed for engines, cockpits, or wing roots where fuel tanks were located. A 2-second burst from 8 synchronized Brownings delivered 160 rounds into a target area, and German bomber crews described Hurricane attacks as flying through a wall of lead that no defensive armament could effectively counter, with the concentrated fire pattern causing catastrophic damage that often destroyed bombers outright, rather than merely damaging them enough to force abort. Hurricane pilots developed attacking techniques specifically optimized for bomber destruction. Standard tactics called for diving attacks from above and behind, firing long bursts at close range, often within 200 yards, then breaking away beneath the bomber's defensive fire arc. The aggressive close-range tactics succeeded because Hurricane construction could absorb the defensive fire that forced more cautious approaches, creating a tactical feedback loop where ruggedness enabled aggressive tactics that maximized firepower effectiveness against the bombers that RAF Fighter Command needed to win the strategic battle. The results spoke clearly through Luftwaffe casualty statistics. During peak Battle of Britain periods, German bomber losses exceeded 10% per mission, unsustainable rates that forced tactical revisions. Hurricane squadrons systematically destroyed He-11-1, Do-17, and Ju-88 bombers at rates that made daylight bombing operations untenable, achieving the strategic objective of preventing invasion by making it impossible for Luftwaffe to establish the air superiority that Operation Sea Lion required. The tactical doctrine worked perfectly until one critical weakness emerged. The Hurricane's performance degraded significantly above 20,000 feet, where its Merlin engine and aerodynamics couldn't match Spitfire or Bf-109 capabilities. Maximum speed dropped from 340 miles per hour at 15,000 feet to barely 300 miles per hour at 25,000 feet, while climb rate and maneuverability suffered proportionally. Luftwaffe tacticians recognized this altitude vulnerability and adjusted tactics accordingly, with Bf-109s engaging at 25,000 plus feet, where they held decisive advantages while bombers climbed higher to exploit the altitude band where Hurricanes struggled, forcing RAF Fighter Command to commit Spitfire squadrons to high-altitude interception while Hurricane effectiveness declined. The altitude limitations created dangerous situations when Hurricane squadrons encountered high-flying raids without Spitfire support. German fighter sweeps at 28,000 feet could attack Hurricane formations from above with impunity, using altitude advantage to dictate engagement terms. Hurricane pilots climbing to intercept high-altitude raids found themselves at tactical disadvantage. Slow, unmaneuverable, and vulnerable to diving attacks from Bf-109s operating in their optimal performance envelope, and several Hurricane squadrons suffered disproportionate losses when caught at altitude by German fighters exploiting the Hurricane's high-altitude weaknesses. RAF Fighter Command adapted tactics to minimize altitude exposure. Hurricane squadrons patrolled at 12,000 to 18,000 feet, where performance remained competitive, while Spitfire squadrons covered higher altitudes. Ground controllers directed Hurricanes against bomber formations below 20,000 feet and Spitfires against high-altitude threats, creating tactical layering that protected Hurricane vulnerabilities while exploiting their bomber-killing capabilities. But this adaptive doctrine required careful coordination and broke down when German formations penetrated at multiple altitudes simultaneously. The altitude problem persisted throughout the Hurricane's service life, despite engine upgrades and airframe improvements. Later variants with more powerful Merlin engines improved performance but never achieved the high-altitude capabilities that combat increasingly demanded. By 1941, as aerial combat moved to higher altitudes and bomber interception required 25,000-plus foot operations, the Hurricane's tactical role shifted toward ground attack, night fighting, and overseas theaters where altitude performance mattered less than ruggedness and firepower. Despite limitations, one mission proved the Hurricane's true worth. As the Battle of Britain transitioned to the Blitz, Hurricanes pioneered night fighter operations that protected British cities from nocturnal bombing raids. Early night fighter Hurricanes operated without radar, relying on searchlights and pilot eyesight to intercept bombers silhouetted against fires and moonlight. These primitive operations achieved limited success, but demonstrated the Hurricane's stability, and handling characteristics made it suitable for night operations, where many contemporary fighters proved too difficult to fly in darkness, and the robust construction provided confidence for pilots attempting instrument flying and night landings that more delicate aircraft made nerve-wracking. The Sea Hurricane adapted the fighter for carrier operations, addressing Royal Navy's desperate need for fighter protection for convoys beyond land-based air cover range. Early conversions used catapult-launched Hurricanes that couldn't land aboard ships. Pilots ditched alongside after combat and were recovered by destroyer. Later, Sea Hurricane variants featured arrestor hooks for carrier landing, creating the first truly effective carrier fighter available to Royal Navy in numbers sufficient to protect Atlantic convoys from FW-200 Condor reconnaissance bombers that were directing U-boat wolf packs to merchant shipping with devastating effectiveness. Hurricane operations from escort carriers and CAM ships destroyed or drove off German reconnaissance aircraft that otherwise operated with impunity over convoy routes. The psychological impact exceeded direct kills. Knowing fighters could appear forced Luftwaffe maritime patrol aircraft to operate more cautiously. Sea Hurricanes shot down multiple FW-200s and Ju-88s during 1941 to 1942, protecting convoys that carried supplies Britain needed for survival. Demonstrating the Hurricane's versatility extended far beyond the fighter-versus-fighter combat that monopolized public attention and historical narratives. Even as newer fighters arrived, the Hurricane's legacy was already secured. By the way, if these forgotten Hurricane stories are blowing your mind, you need to subscribe because we're just scratching the surface of World War II's buried secrets. The Hurricane's relegation to historical footnote status, while the Spitfire achieved legendary status, reveals how aesthetics and perception shape historical memory as powerfully as actual achievement. The Spitfire's elegant elliptical wings and streamlined profile captured imagination in ways the Hurricane's workmanlike appearance never could. Wartime propaganda emphasized Spitfire imagery because the graceful fighter embodied the narrative of British technological sophistication and aesthetic superiority, defeating Nazi aggression, while the Hurricane's sturdy pragmatism didn't photograph as dramatically or inspire the emotional resonance that propaganda required for morale purposes. Post-war aviation history perpetuated the Spitfire mythology through selective emphasis and statistical misrepresentation. Books, films, and documentaries featured Spitfires prominently while treating Hurricanes as supporting players. The statistical reality that Hurricanes destroyed more German aircraft, equipped more squadrons, and bore the primary burden of bomber interception during Britain's most critical period, disappeared beneath narratives emphasizing technological advancement and fighter-versus-fighter combat, where Spitfire advantages were undeniable, systematically erasing the Hurricane's primary contribution from popular understanding. RAF doctrine absorbed the Hurricane's lessons, even as the aircraft itself faded from memory. The recognition that destroying enemy bombers mattered more than fighter superiority influenced post-war defensive fighter development. British jet fighter designs emphasized bomber interception capabilities and rugged construction over pure performance, demonstrating that Hurricane operational experience shaped institutional knowledge even when the aircraft itself received no credit, and the maintenance advantages of straightforward, robust design influenced engineering priorities that lasted decades. Veterans who flew both types consistently praised the Hurricane's handling, ruggedness, and fighting qualities despite acknowledging Spitfire performance superiority. Many aces scored their first kills in Hurricanes before transitioning to Spitfires. Their testimonies emphasized that the Hurricane was a pilot's aircraft, forgiving, stable, and confidence-inspiring qualities that made it effective in the hands of average pilots rather than requiring exceptional skill to operate effectively, creating force multiplication through accessibility that elite performance alone couldn't achieve in desperate circumstances where Britain needed every pilot defending the realm. The Hawker Hurricane won the Battle of Britain through statistical dominance that history forgot, while the Spitfire claimed glory. Its rugged construction, devastating firepower, and bomber-killing doctrine achieved the strategic objective, preventing invasion, that technical superiority alone couldn't accomplish. The Hurricane proved that wars are won by workhorses, not thoroughbreds, and effectiveness matters more than elegance. Watch the next video on vintage planes for more forgotten aviation stories.